What if the stranger you carried home in the rain was the missing piece of a family you thought God had already taken from you? Stay right there. Don't move. Because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that will make you hold your children a little tighter tonight, call someone you've been avoiding, and remind you, truly remind you, that life is not done writing its most beautiful chapters just because you've survived the worst ones. If you're new here, welcome to this channel. We tell stories that matter. Stories that breathe. Stories that find you exactly when you need them. If this one moves you, and it will, please hit that like button right now, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this again. We drop new stories every week, and this community is built on people who still believe in the miracle of second chances. Now, let me tell you about Ethan Cole. Ethan Cole was 34 years old, and he was exhausted in the way only single fathers understand, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that lives in your bones, in the quiet after bedtime, in the empty chair across the dinner table that nobody ever sits in anymore. He lived in a modest apartment on the east side of Portland, Oregon, in a neighborhood where the buildings were old but the people were decent. He worked double shifts at a shipping logistics company, loading, organizing, coordinating deliveries, not a glamorous job, but it was honest, and it paid enough to keep the lights on and his daughter, Maya, in ballet lessons on Tuesday evenings. Maya was 6 years old. She had her mother's eyes, warm, deep brown, with a kind of knowing in them that made strangers stop and stare. She had 2 missing front teeth and she laughed too loudly and she called him Daddy Ethan when she was feeling dramatic, which was always. She was, without question or contest, the greatest thing that had ever happened to Ethan Cole. Her mother, Claire, had been Ethan's whole world before Maya was born, and after Maya arrived, she had become the sun around which both their worlds orbited. Claire was funny and bold and she made the best lemon chicken in the Pacific Northwest and she used to sing in the shower at 6 in the morning, loud enough to wake the neighbors, and Ethan used to pretend to be annoyed, but he never was. Not even once. Claire died of a brain aneurysm on a Tuesday morning, 18 months after Maya was born. She was 29 years old. She had no symptoms, no warning, no goodbye. One morning she was there, singing in the shower, and then she was not. That was 5 years ago. And in those 5 years, Ethan had done the only thing he knew how to do, he kept going. He got up every morning. He made Maya's lunch. He braided her hair badly and apologized and she told him it was perfect. He attended parent-teacher meetings and birthday parties and he cried in the car when Maya was asleep in the back seat because that was the only place he allowed himself to fall apart anymore. He had become, in his grief, someone almost invisible, a man doing a quiet, sacred work that the world mostly does not reward or even notice. He had not been on a single date since Claire died. Not because he had sworn off love, but because when you have been loved the way Claire loved him, the bar is no longer a bar. It becomes a horizon. And every time he tried to imagine starting over, he just thought about Maya's eyes, and Claire's voice, and he decided the loneliness was easier than the risk. It was a Friday night in November, and the rain was coming down the way Portland rain always does in November, not dramatically, not like a storm, but steady and cold and absolutely relentless, the kind of rain that gets into everything. Ethan had worked a 12-hour shift and was walking home because his car was in the shop. He had his hood up and his head down and he was thinking about nothing more complicated than whether he had enough eggs for Maya's breakfast when he almost stepped on her. She was sitting on the sidewalk outside a hotel, her back against the wall, her shoes off, one heel in her hand. Her blazer was soaked through. She was wearing clothes that probably cost more than a month of Ethan's rent, and she was completely, comprehensively drunk. She looked up at him when he stopped, and even through the glaze of too many glasses of something expensive, she managed to look at him with a kind of defiant dignity that almost made him smile. "I'm fine," she said, before he had said a single word. "I didn't say you weren't," he replied. "You were going to. I was going to ask if you needed help." She blinked at him. The rain kept falling. She looked, for just a moment, like she might cry, and then the dignity snapped back into place like a shield, and she said, "I don't need help. I just need a moment." Her name, he would learn later, was Diana Holt. And Diana Holt was, on paper, one of the most powerful women in Portland. She was 32 years old and she was the CEO of Holt Meridian, a mid-sized tech firm her father had built and which she had, in the 6 years since his death, tripled in revenue and reputation. She was the kind of woman who appeared in business magazines under headlines like, "The Future is Female" and "Ruthless, Relentless, and Right." She had a team of 37 employees who were slightly afraid of her. She had a personal assistant who sent flowers on her behalf because she always forgot. She had a penthouse apartment with a view of the river and a kitchen she never cooked in. And right now she was sitting on a wet Portland sidewalk with one shoe in her hand, and something in her eyes that looked very much like a woman who had been holding everything together for so long that she had finally, quietly, come undone. Ethan Cole did not overthink it. He was not that kind of man. He crouched down beside her, offered her his hand, and said, "Come on. Let's get you somewhere dry." She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. He could not in good conscience put her in a cab alone in this state. He had tried, he had flagged one down, opened the door, and she had looked at the back seat and said, with unexpected clarity, "I don't know my address," and then leaned against the doorframe and closed her eyes, and that was that. So Ethan Cole, single father, 12-hour shift survivor, a man who had nowhere to be except home to his sleeping daughter and the babysitter he'd already texted, he made a decision. He called his neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who had a key and who was a saint, confirmed Maya was asleep and safe, and then he guided this expensive, stubborn, rain-soaked stranger back to his apartment. She slept on his couch, wrapped in the spare blanket that usually lived in the closet for when Claire's mother, but he stopped that thought before it finished. In the morning, Diana woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of small feet running down a hallway and a child's voice saying, "Daddy Ethan, there's a lady on our couch." Ethan appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs, looking significantly more composed than Diana felt. "Good morning," he said. "How's your head?" "Terrible," she said honestly. "How did I get here?" "Slowly," he said. "And with some difficulty on a curb near the Marriott." She stared at him. Then she looked at Maya, who was standing in the hall staring at her with the unfiltered fascination that only 6-year-olds are capable of. "Hi," Maya said. "Are you a princess? You have shiny clothes." Diana looked down at her ruined blazer. "Not exactly." "That's okay," Maya said seriously. "Daddy Ethan says you don't have to be a princess to be important." Something shifted in Diana's chest. She didn't quite have words for it yet. She stayed for breakfast. She hadn't meant to. But Ethan made eggs and toast with a calm, unhurried steadiness that felt like the most foreign thing in her world, and Maya chattered about her ballet recital and her missing teeth and a boy at school named Oscar who was, apparently, annoying but in a good way, and Diana sat at this small kitchen table in this small apartment and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like she could breathe. She told him, eventually, what had broken her the night before. It was not work. Work she could handle. Work was the one place in the world that made complete sense to her. It was her mother. Her mother, Eleanor Holt, was 70 years old and had been in a memory care facility for the past 2 years after her Alzheimer's diagnosis. Diana visited every Sunday. Every single Sunday, without fail, regardless of where in the world she was or what deal was closing, she got on a plane, or she drove, or she rearranged her entire schedule, and she sat with her mother for 2 hours and she held her hand and she talked to her about small things, the weather, the flowers in the garden, the way the light came through the window. And last Thursday, for the first time, her mother had not recognized her. She had looked at Diana, her only daughter, the child she had raised alone after Diana's father left when Diana was 9, the little girl she had worked 3 jobs to keep in good shoes and piano lessons. She had looked at her daughter and said, politely, as if to a stranger, "You have very kind eyes." Are you one of the nurses? Diana had smiled and said yes, and held her hand anyway, and waited until she was in the parking lot to collapse against the steering wheel and make sounds she had never made before in her adult life. I've been holding her disease at arm's length for 2 years, Diana said quietly, staring into her coffee cup. I kept thinking, she still knows me. She still knows me. And that was the thing I was holding on to. And now. She stopped. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Maya had gone to watch cartoons, and the apartment was soft and still. My wife died 5 years ago, he said. Suddenly. No warning. He paused. The hardest part wasn't the first week. Everyone rallies in the first week. The hardest part was month 4, month 7, month 11, when everyone had moved on and expected you to be moving on too, and you were still standing in the cereal aisle at the grocery store crying because she used to like that particular brand. Diana looked at him. Grief doesn't go away, he said. But it changes shape. And sometimes the new shape is something you can actually carry. She did not know why, but she believed him completely. Over the following weeks, something quiet and unplanned began to form between them. Diana came back. Not romantically, not at first, not with any declaration or intention, she just kept finding reasons to return to that small apartment where a little girl called her the shiny lady and a man made coffee like it was a form of prayer. She brought Maya a book about a girl who becomes an astronaut. Maya read it 4 times in 1 week. She brought Ethan a good bottle of olive oil as a joke, because he'd mentioned once that his was the cheap kind, and he laughed harder than she expected. It was on her 5th visit that she mentioned her mother's facility, a place called Maplewood Gardens, on the west side of the city. Ethan went very still. Maplewood Gardens, he said. On Clearfield Avenue? Yes. Why? He set down his cup slowly. What's your mother's name? Diana looked at him oddly. Eleanor. Eleanor Holt. Well, her name before she married my father. Before he left. Her maiden name was Voss, Ethan said quietly. Eleanor Voss. The silence that fell between them was the loudest thing either of them had ever heard. How do you know that? Diana whispered. Ethan stood up. He walked to the bookshelf in the living room, the one crowded with Maya's picture books and a few worn paperbacks, and from the very top shelf he brought down a photograph in a simple wooden frame. He set it on the table in front of Diana. It was a photo of a woman, young, laughing, caught mid-movement with her hair flying, standing in a garden with an older woman. The older woman had her arm around the younger one's shoulders, and they were both squinting into the sun, and they were both smiling in the exact same way, the same angle, the same joy. The younger woman Diana did not recognize, but she felt she should. The older woman was her mother. 30 years younger, but absolutely, unmistakably, her mother. That's Claire, Ethan said. My wife. And that is Eleanor. Her grandmother. It came out slowly, in pieces, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. Claire had been adopted as an infant by the Cole family in Seattle. She had grown up knowing she was adopted, and she had, in her late 20s, begun quietly searching for her biological family. She had found Eleanor Voss, then already in the early stages of memory decline, and they had met twice, in secret, because Claire hadn't known how to tell Ethan yet. She had been waiting for the right moment. She had been planning to tell him the spring after Maya was born. She died that winter. Eleanor, deep in her illness, had lost the memory of those meetings. Diana had never known they happened. She had never known her mother had a granddaughter. She had never known that Claire Cole, the wife of the man she had been sitting in this kitchen with for weeks, was her half-sister. Maya was Diana's niece. Maya, who laughed too loudly and had 2 missing teeth and called Diana, the shiny lady, was her blood. Diana sat at that small kitchen table and she wept in a way she had not wept since the parking lot of Maplewood Gardens. And Ethan sat across from her, and for the first time in 5 years, he also wept, not from grief this time, but from something he didn't yet have a word for, something that felt like the specific relief of a question you stopped letting yourself ask, finally finding its answer. They told Maya carefully, the next afternoon, sitting on the living room floor with her stuffed elephant between them. They told her that her mommy had had a secret, a beautiful secret, that she was going to tell Daddy Ethan a long time ago, but that she hadn't had the chance. They told her that Diana was connected to her mommy. That Diana's mom, an old woman named Eleanor who lived in a special house where nurses helped her, was her mommy's grandmother. Maya listened very seriously, the way she listened to things that mattered. Then she said, "So Diana is like my family?" "Yes," Ethan said. "In a way, she is." Maya turned and looked at Diana with those warm brown eyes, Claire's eyes, and said, without any hesitation, "I knew it. You smell like love." Diana laughed and cried at the same moment, which Maya found extremely impressive. They went together on Sunday. All three of them. Eleanor was having a gentle day, not clear, not entirely present, but calm and sweet and happy in the soft, unanchored way she sometimes was. She was sitting by the window in her cardigan, watching the garden, when they came in. Diana sat beside her and took her hand, as she always did. Eleanor looked at her. Then past her. And then her eyes found Maya. Something moved in Eleanor's face. Something deep and cellular, below language and memory and the cruel damage of disease. She leaned forward slightly, and she looked at Maya the way you look at something your heart recognizes even when your mind cannot. "Oh," Eleanor said softly. "Oh, you look just like." She didn't finish. The name wouldn't come. But her eyes were full. Maya climbed up onto the chair beside her without being asked, the way children do when they know they are needed, and she took the old woman's other hand, and she said, "Hi. I'm Maya. I think you might be my great-grandma." Eleanor looked at her for a long, long moment. Then she smiled, the real smile, the one Diana had been missing for 2 years, and she said, "What a wonderful thing to be." It did not all resolve neatly. Life, real life, does not do that. Eleanor's illness continued. There were harder Sundays ahead. Diana's company had a difficult quarter and she worked impossible hours. Ethan's car broke down again. Maya had a nightmare phase that lasted 6 weeks and required a lot of middle-of-the-night reassurance. But now Diana came to Sunday visits. Now there were 3 of them at that window, and sometimes Maya fell asleep in the chair beside Eleanor with her small hand still in the old woman's, and Eleanor would stroke her hair with the careful tenderness of someone who has loved before and knows, on some level that transcends memory, that she is doing so again. And Ethan and Diana, slowly, carefully, with the full weight of history and loss and hope on both sides, began to find their way towards something new. Not a replacement. Never a replacement. But a continuation. A next chapter. The kind of love that is not born from forgetting, but from having the courage to remember and choose again anyway. On Maya's 7th birthday, Diana came to the party with a cake she had, badly, charmingly, baked herself, and Maya declared it the best cake she had ever tasted even though it was slightly lopsided and the frosting spelling said HPPY birthday. Later that night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan and Diana sat on the small balcony of the apartment, and he asked her something he had not asked anyone in 5 years. He asked if she wanted to stay. Not for the night. Not for the occasion. He meant in a larger, quieter, more permanent sense. Diana looked out over the city, the same city where she had built her career, carried her grief, visited her mother, and somehow, on a rainy Friday night, ended up sitting on a sidewalk in front of a hotel with one shoe in her hand. "I think," she said, "that I've been looking for this without knowing what I was looking for." "That's a yes," he said. She looked at him. Claire's husband. Her sister's husband. Maya's father. The man who had crouched down in the rain and offered her his hand with no expectation and no agenda, just simple, unremarkable human decency. That's a yes, she said. Closing, the message, soft music, narrator voice. Here is what this story wants to leave with you. Sometimes the people who are meant to be in your life arrive in the most unlikely moments, in the rain, on a sidewalk, at the end of a terrible night when you are too exhausted to put your best face forward. Sometimes the connections that will change you are not announced with fanfare. They are quiet. They are a hand offered in the dark. They are a child saying you smell like love with the absolute certainty that only innocence carries. Claire did not get to tell her story. But her story was never lost. It was living in her daughter's eyes, in an old woman's smile, in a stranger's hand stretched out on a rainy November night. Grief is real. Loss is real. The emptiness that follows the people you love is as real as anything on this earth. But so is this, life, relentless and generous and wildly creative, keeps finding ways to knit us back together. Keeps placing people in our path at exactly the right moment. Keeps leaving doors open in the walls we build around our hearts. Ethan kept going when there was no particular reason to believe going was worth it. Maya grew up knowing she was loved absolutely. Eleanor spent her final chapter held by people who found each other against all odds. And Diana learned that the life she had built so fiercely on her own had, all along, a missing room. And that room had always had her name on the door. Don't give up on the story. You are not at the end. You are, very likely, right in the middle, in the hard part, the confusing part, the part where you cannot see what is coming next. But something is coming. Hold on. If this story moved you, please give it a like. It helps more people find these stories when they need them most. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join this community. We are here every week, telling the stories that remind us what it means to be human. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose rainy Friday night you might be changing. See you in the next one.